We're going to start.
All right, you're all set. Have a good show.
You ready? Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone. My guest today is Alda. Mr. Alda has earned international recognition as an actor, writer, and director. In addition to The Aviator, for which he was nominated for an Academy Award, some of his other films include Bridge of Spies, Wonderlust, Crimes and Misdemeanors, Flirting with Disaster, Manhattan Murder Mystery, and The Band Played On, as well as The Seduction of Joe Tynan, which he wrote, and The Four Seasons, Sweet Liberty, A New Life, and Betsy's Wedding, all of which he wrote and directed. He became a household name when he was cast as Hawkeye Pierce on the long-running TV series MASH, for which he wrote and directed many of the episodes. He is a multiple Emmy Award winner, both for his acting and writing. Most recently for television, he starred as Uncle Pete in Louis C.K.'s groundbreaking web series Horace and Pete. Some of his Broadway credits include Art, QED, Glengarry Glen Ross, and Jake's Women. He was nominated for the Tony Award 3 times. He hosted the award-winning series Scientific American Frontiers on PBS for 11 years. He has been dubbed the quintessential honorary woman, a feminist icon, for his activism on behalf of women's rights. He is a best-selling author. His most recent book is If I Understand You, Would I Have This Look on My Face? He is a husband, father, and grandfather. He is an activist and a passionate lover and spokesperson for the science community. Welcome, Alan Alda, to the podcast.
Oh, thank you. I woke up during the middle of that.
Do you need some coffee now?
And, I might go back again.
Well, it must be kind of extraordinary because, as you know, having lived it, this is about, a very small percentage of the things that you've done over your lifetime.
Well, it sure doesn't sound it. It sounds like it goes on forever.
I'm sorry. There was that Evelyn Wood reading dynamics course where you could speed read. I remember the commercial
That's right.
for, and
Which is not a good idea when you read out loud.
No, which I love reading out loud. I've always loved reading and reading out loud. So one of my favorite parts of doing this podcast, I don't get to read out loud that much anymore.
You read out loud surprisingly well.
For a girl from Teaneck.
No, for anybody, because some people who are paid to read out loud professionally do a terrible job. There's a thing I think that happens when you read out loud, which is that you're not speaking spontaneously to another person. And I don't know whether this is true or not. I'm just making a speculation. But my guess is that the social parts of your brain aren't being enlisted in the communication. You're just processing the words on the paper, most of us, most of the time. And you read it almost as if you're talking to a person.
Well, the thing is, and I've said this before, one of the criteria for coming on this show is the person I'm interviewing has achieved a really grand level of success in the thing they're passionate about, and they have to be kind. There are a lot of people who are super successful. There aren't a lot of people who are equally kind. And so I feel like, and I don't mean to be corny, but when I read the bio of the people I'm interviewing, most of whom are people I know personally, I feel like I'm reading a love letter because I am so proud of the accomplishments of my guests, and so proud to be on a planet where this goodness can live at the same time as a lot of
so
no
many
goodness.
of those other planets are hard to live on.
Well, you're a science guy. You've been there. You've simulated life on all of those places. So I say thank you, but I also think it's because I don't feel like I'm reading the phone book, but I do feel like I'm reading the credentials of people that I love.
I was going to say, how do you audition people for whether or not they're nice people?
Well, I have a kind meter. And when you walk through the door to the podcast, it's like Willy Wonka. It's like the arrow has to go. Yours was okay. It went to the middle. We'll see if by the end we can, not bad.
You have to hit the hammer with all your might.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you because I know that you grew up your early days were in the city where you now live, again, Manhattan.
Yes.
Your birth name was?
Alfonso d'Abruzzo.
So, first of all, is there anyone in your life who still calls you that or any version of that name?
Sometimes my wife calls me Fonzie.
Is that what you were was that your nickname as a kid?
No, but that's a traditional Italian abbreviation.
So she's taken
of
that on.
just as a gag. But no, sometimes she calls me Allie, which is what I was called as a little boy.
At what age did your name become Alan Alda?
When I told my father in my teens, I guess around 15 or 16, that I wanted to be an actor, he said, well, you better use Alda,
Which was
which
his
was a
name already.
made-up name.
What was his real
His
name?
name was Alfonso d'Abruzzo too, also, and he took AL from Alfonso and DA from d'Abruzzo and made Alda. So that's I was thinking of keeping d'Abruzzo just out of
Respect and
respect for my real name and the Italian part of my life. But I realized when I was in the army. No, I guess I realized this earlier, but I really saw it in the army. Nobody could pronounce it.
right.
Hey, Dabuzio, come over here, you know.
So do you think if you had started out now
Yeah.
in a world supposedly that is less obsessed with anglicizing names, do you think you would have kept? I mean, if you think of the Pacinos and the Scorseses and the De Niros and a whole,
Yeah, they have much easier names.
that's it. So it
for,
wasn't
for
just
Americans.
it wasn't specifically the Italian sound to it as much as no one could say it the right
Yeah,
way.
that was. If I had an easier to pronounce name, I think I would have kept it because it meant a lot to me. And also at that time, there were other actors who were beginning to use real ethnic names.
Did you
Now
know your
people use names like Hergermeister and they don't care what you think.
you're
That's,
like your agents let you keep that name? Did you know your grandparents growing up?
yeah, sure.
So were you? Can you tell me a little bit about growing up a d'Abruzzo?
Well, I was half Irish, and on the Irish side, my grandmother was a little crazy.
That was her name. How do you say that in Irish?
No, her husband called her fat, and she took it.
Okay.
Hey, fat, to get me a beer.
Oh my God, that makes me.
Yeah, and she used to hit him with her purse.
Okay, so
So-
she found a way to
Well,
get
she
back
just
at
did
him.
it for no reason.
Do you remember this? Are you seeing this in
No,
your mind's eye?
I saw. I was pulling up to pick them up on a street corner once, and there she was banging her purse on his head. I know he must have said something she didn't like. So my grandfather on the Italian side was Antonio, a little guy who never said much. Had been a barber, mostly on a ship.
Was he born in America or
No,
in
born
Italy?
in Italy.
Do you know where?
I think in Sant'Agata dei Goti, about 30 kilometers outside of Naples.
Okay.
He told me that when I was a boy, he told me that 450 years earlier, the family had come from Spain, which would have put it around 1492. So my guess is the family was Jewish,
Yeah.
because that was the year of the expulsion.
Yeah.
And I'm imagining they went to Naples because that was also owned by Spain at the time. But then 2 years later, Naples kicked out the Jews, as Spain had done. So they probably went north to where the Abruzzo region is.
Sure.
And then when things calmed down, maybe that's when they came down to Sant'Agata dei Goti near Naples. But at that point, their name would say from Abruzzo,
Sure.
d'Abruzzo. But the other indication that it might be Jewish is that in Italy, if you're named after a region or a town, the odds are 2 to 1 that you're Jewish, because they would just come in and take the name of the region.
Interesting. Do you speak Italian?
No, but I speak Yiddish.
You and that's the other way they know. If
Yeah,
you could
that's
speak
if
Yiddish,
you're born speaking Yiddish, it's almost sure that you're Jewish. But
that's
not
a really good
necessarily,
litmus
yeah.
test. Yeah, there isn't enough
I-
Yiddish spoken anymore.
I can get by a little bit in Italian.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sure you can order in a restaurant really well. So you were born in Manhattan?
Yeah, on 32nd Street and 3rd Avenue in a brownstone.
You know how much that brownstone would go for today? Wish you'd bought it.
I don't think so. I walked by it a few years ago. I don't
Did you
think- I
have
don't-
any? So when you walked by it, what was?
Well,
what
I was
came
only
up
there
for
till
you?
I remember it from when I was about 3. So that
Wow.
and mainly out on the sidewalk where a girl slapped me on the face.
Who wasn't your grandmother?
No, she was my age. We're sitting on a running board of a car.
Yeah.
And I said something that offended her and her mother. And her mother said, hit him. And she hit me in the face.
Wow.
See, my father was in burlesque
Already.
when I was born.
Okay.
So maybe I picked up language in burlesque that this 3-year-old girl didn't like.
Or her mother.
Her mother, yeah. Who knows what I said?
But how about that you remember that?
Well, if somebody hits you in the face, you remember that quite a while.
Yeah. Well, luckily you probably haven't been hit in the face that many times, so
No,
it doesn't
that's true.
become,
Yeah, it doesn't
you know,
become like a repetitious.
de rigueur. Exactly. So your dad was in the burlesque. So somehow your father, who grew up with Italian immigrant parents,
Yeah.
became a burlesque star.
He was actually known as one of the best straight men in burlesque.
and,
And
your-
he was a singer.
and where did he meet your mom?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay.
She unfortunately, she was shortly after they married, she began to get the symptoms of schizophrenia, paranoia, and all my life she was mentally ill.
Was she in hospitals? Did she live with you?
She was in a hospital when I was about 18.
But until then, you were living with your mom who was
Yeah.
schizophrenic?
Yeah.
And was she having episodes?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Wow. So that must have been incredibly, I don't want to put words in your mouth to describe it, but I'm sure there weren't a lot of.
Say any word. It'll work.
Not, I'll use two. Not great.
Not great.
It probably, you might have been the only kid on your block.
Yeah.
dealing
yeah,
with that.
That's good. And I think it benefited me a little bit because I had to observe her very carefully from the time I was young. I remember when I was 6, her turning to me with a depressed, anxious look on her face, and I knew something was wrong. I was 6. Probably from at least that time, I had to read her face, read her emotions to find out if what she was telling me was reality or just her reality. So
you-
that was helpful as an actor and as a writer.
Sure. So you lived in the 30s until you were 3, and then did you guys leave the city?
We probably left earlier.
Okay.
Because my father was touring
And would you go
burlesque
with him?
theaters. Yeah, I would stand in the wings and watch the show every
So you weren't
performance.
going to school?
Well, I was too young to go to school.
But
when
okay, so when
yeah,
you matriculated, when you're in kindergarten or first grade,
Yeah, first grade, it was at a boarding school.
that's how they handled it.
Yeah,
So you went to boarding school when you were about 7 years old?
6. And it was really awful.
Oh my God, Alan, I am so sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Everything turned out okay.
It really did.
Yeah.
It really did. How
I mean,
remarkable.
it might be an example of enough stress helps you out if it's not too much for you. I think
Yeah.
everybody comes in with a different level of an ability to accept stress. But if you get it's like working out, I guess. I can only tell you about working out from what I've read.
I've seen movies where people work
Yeah,
out,
it's
and I've
very-
read
aren't
books.
they
It
interesting?
seems amazing.
Amazing
Not
what they
for
do.
me.
No.
Not for me.
But apparently, if you push yourself just past your regular limit or some kind of limit, I don't know what they call it.
Well, we don't know
You're-
because we don't do it. We're
You're-
not in that
yeah,
club.
You're not falling down dead limit. If you just go past that,
That's a good place to stop.
yeah.
Just before-
Yes, it's a really good place.
Can you lower that? Can you lower that treadmill now just a little bit? Because I'm actually about to die.
Yeah. So that is kind of stress may have helped me out. I don't know.
Were you incredibly worried or sensitive to the possibility that you might have inherited some?
You know, somebody asked me that in an interview, and I
Yeah,
said,
it wasn't
no.
me?
I said, no. Are
you sure it wasn't just a minute ago?
No, I do realize this is an interview.
You know where you are.
Yeah. I can tell by the microphones.
Yes, and the
Yeah,
headphones.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
somebody else interviewed me, said, and I said no. And he said, but it's in your book. I said, well, then yes.
Well,
I forgot.
let me finish.
Yeah, let me finish.
Not done. So,
I guess I had a worry once. You know, it wasn't a severe worry. But I think everybody who has a relative who's not well mentally wonders if they're going to get it too, especially because
Yes.
her mother was not too well off either.
right. And there's no one, obviously now we live in a world where people can talk more freely about this stuff. I can
Oh,
imagine when you were growing up, everything
Nobody.
was quite hush-hush.
My father and I both suffered from her illness, and neither one of us talked about it.
Together even.
Yeah, not to
Wow.
each other.
Wow. So at some point, you decided to, well, your father's story is kind of fascinating because he starts out sort of in this traditional touring the country in burlesque,
Yeah.
and then he became a major movie star.
Right off the bat, his first movie was playing George Gershwin in the film biography of Gershwin.
And international stardom,
Yeah,
right?
his movie was shown all over the world. And then the studio put him in crappy movies, and
Afterwards.
he disappeared again for 7 years, and then played Sky Masterson in Guys and Dolls
On Broadway. So
and
when
got
you're-
a Tony. I mean, he would.
That's right.
And then he disappeared again.
Well, that's what a great way to see the reality of what a career looks like
Yeah.
for you from a very young age, and you still decided to do it.
Well, you don't believe it's going to happen to you.
Either the stardom or
You don't think you're
or
gonna,
anything good.
When you're young, you don't think you're going to die.
Mm.
You don't think you're going to get creaky and cranky. And you sure don't think you're not going to be a success at your chosen profession.
That's right.
Look at all the stunks out there. How come? Surely they're waiting for me.
Stunks Agency.
Yes.
Hello?
Stunks and Company.
I'm so excited because I wanted to open up an agency of some sort.
Well, now you
and
got a name.
Totally. They always say the name will come.
Yeah.
Don't worry. If you sit and just be mindful and meditate. Stunks Incorporated.
I had an agent who was starting his own agency, and he said, "I'm trying to think of a name. What should I call it?" And he kept wanting to call it after the agents, like
Mark Cohen.
great agencies,
Oh,
great agents, or
oh,
something
great
like that. So why don't you call it after the talent? Maybe you'll get more attention.
Yeah. My husband and I used to joke about our agents who, would be called like offer only, and the phone never rang. That was our agency. Offer only. Oh, no. Okay. So, when you decide to become an actor, is your father at the height of his fame, or sort of when? Can you give me a little bit of a timeline? Like when
I think then he was in Guys and Dolls.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's about when you
Yeah.
decided to do it professionally.
Yeah.
And I know that you started out in regional theater.
Oh,
bit,
summer
summer
stock.
stock.
Yeah. Oh, and regional theater at the Cleveland Playhouse.
And when did you meet your beautiful bride of these many years?
60 years. We were just married 60 years.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
That's thrilling.
Shanem Dunk.
A Shanem on the Dunk. Shanem Dunk Agency.
Now you're talking. This is good.
We're on to it.
So we got married in 1957, and I was out of work in 2 or 3 professions.
Right.
And she was very trusting.
She believed in you.
Yeah, she had a career. She was a professional clarinetist. When we got married, she was playing with Stokowski in the Houston Symphony.
Wow. So how did you guys meet?
We met through a friend who was a musician who said to me, come listen to chamber music at my apartment one night. And there was Arlene playing the Mozart clarinet quintet. And I was very shy, and she was very attractive to me. And to probably everybody else in the room. And all I had the nerve to say was, you were very good.
You had her at, you were very good.
I had her at,
She was a sucker.
Yeah.
A sucker for the
But we didn't meet again for a couple of months. And then there's a story that I've told a lot. Maybe you haven't heard it.
Well, I'm cutting that line out when we edit this. It's going to
Okay.
sound like you've never told it before,
Okay.
and you're giving me an exclusive.
Okay. So the next time we met was at dinner at this same mutual friend's apartment. And there was a table full of people, and Arlene kept laughing at my jokes, which I thought was extremely attractive.
The best.
And the woman who was the hostess had made a rum cake for dessert, and she had it cooling on top of an old Philco refrigerator, which shook as it worked. And during dinner, it shook so much the cake slid off the refrigerator and hit the kitchen floor. And Arlene and I were the only two people that got up with spoons and ate it off the floor.
And that became the rum floor cake,
Yeah.
became the traditional
So-
anniversary.
And it turns out flirting over food is the way to really cement things.
That's
So all these
fantastic.
websites, for meeting people and dating,
Sure.
totally useless. Just toss a rum cake on the floor and see
See-
who bites.
Could you imagine? That's amazing. Wow. So you ended up finding your way from theater. A wife who believed in you, thank God, seems to have had a job while you did
I
theater.
got a little job, but before I got, here's something else to edit out.
Yes. I love that. That's
gonna
going to
go
be
on
the
and
intro
on.
music. It's delicious.
Before I got regular work as an actor, in between acting jobs, I took all kinds of work. I was a cab driver and a doorman. I was a clown at the openings of gas stations. And once at the opening of a store that sold chicken parts, raw chicken parts. If you're going to sell raw chicken parts, you ought to have a clown out front.
My mother always said, if I tell you one thing, Ilana,
Yeah,
It's
or
that.
go down to the store from where the clown is and buy a chicken part.
I didn't know that they had clowns at openings of gas stations. It's
I
kind
didn't
of
either, and then
amazing.
I found out why they don't, because the kids from the neighborhood, I was giving out balloons, and they all started grabbing my balloons. I had to climb up a lamppost to get away from them.
That's really sad. I'm so glad you don't have to still do that.
Well, I just came from that.
You, you have a little red on your nose.
think-
I'll give you a
Actually,
little cold.
It's worse than that. When I did that, I didn't know you were supposed to put a foundation on before you put clown makeup on. So I just painted big red lips, big white eyes, and went out in the sun, danced in the street for 6 hours. And then at the end of the day, I washed it off and went home on the subway with big red lips and big white eyes because the sun had burned, sunburn on the rest of my face.
And I bet you met a lot of girls that way.
I hope not, because I was married already.
Right. Well,
We already had children.
we will. Then I'm glad, and that's
Yeah.
the right answer, Mr. Alda. So obviously, the thing that you had started to also get cast on Broadway, and you were sort of making your way in the theater,
Yeah.
and garnering a reputation for yourself as somebody talented and also someone people like to work with, and there was a job, obviously, that really changed the course of your career, and that was getting cast on MASH.
Right.
I'm curious, did you audition for that role?
No, I was already known in the business. I'd played
You were with Offer Only agency.
I had played leads on Broadway and leads in a few movies. And most of them didn't last very long. One Broadway play closed during intermission.
Wait, that's not the apple tree. No, what closed
No.
during intermission? Is that true?
Almost.
But wait, I have a few more lines. That's okay, Alan. We're going to take your
Well,
we're going to
most
take your
shows closed.
costume
But
now.
what amazed me was I'd come home and say to Arlene after a day's rehearsal, this play will close out of town, or this play will run one night. And I was the only one in the company who knew that, apparently. I don't know.
So you've already had a
except
sixth
in one
sense.
case, the producer, who would produce anything that came his way, so he could, after the play closed after one night, he would go home with the furniture.
Oh, so he furnished his home that
yeah,
way.
he always had something to
So
put.
he had that's amazing.
That's how it lived.
I got one little thing from that Santo Laquasto who had done the set for Jake's Women, which is where
Yeah.
you and I met,
What did
that
you
Broadway
get? Did
play.
you get the couch?
No, I got a teeny little a little bench, like a little ottoman sort of
Oh.
thing that had been on the set. And I have to say that was a really, and to this day remains like a very special
That was fun.
piece. That was a
Yeah.
great play. And you know, well, that is later. So when I met you doing Jake's Women, you had already done MASH. You were offered the part. So you had a meeting with whom to decide if you were
That
going to
was
do
an
it?
interesting question because I got the script while I was in the Utah State Prison.
Again?
Yeah.
You were allowed one phone call.
You're allowed one script.
Why are we not back in vaudeville? I don't understand.
I thought we were.
Would anyone else think we're
You
as
mean
funny
this-
as I think we are? This is my problem. I'm my best audience. I'm hilarious.
I was making a movie in the Utah State Prison where
Okay.
we had 3,000 inmates who are extras.
Are you serious?
Yeah, and it's so surprising. Not a single one of them was guilty. They all came up to me and told me how they were innocent.
Listen, I have to tell you something. You have to help me.
Well,
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't do it. But if you need to kill somebody, here's how you do it. So I got the
That's
script
good to know.
for the pilot of MASH, and I thought it was great. And I said to Arlene on the phone, "This is wonderful, but I can't do it because it has to be shot in California, and we live in New Jersey."
And you had not done that before, gone away for long stretches of
Well,
time.
no, he said this could run a year.
Yeah, right. Could you imagine?
Yeah, it ran 11. So a day later, she called me back and said, "Look, if it's so good, maybe we can solve the problem with travel." So when we did it, finally, I would fly home every weekend or every time I had a couple of days off.
So you were
But-
exhausted but employed.
I was on jet lag most of the time. It was a nice little buzz. But I was I was in the Utah prison until the day before rehearsal for MASH.
Really? So it all
Yeah.
happened that quickly?
Yeah, so I said, "Look, I have to talk to you about this because I don't want to do a television show that makes war look like a lot of laughs." There had been a number of shows like that.
Like Hogan's Heroes or
Yeah.
sort of other
Yeah, and
McHale's
McHale's
Navy. Yeah.
It was as if the war was happening someplace else or not happening at all. People were just having fun service comedy
Right.
routines to go through. So I wanted to have a conversation with them, and we had it at 1:00 in the morning in a coffee shop in Beverly Hills, and the next day we started rehearsing.
So who was at that meeting? Do you recall?
The producer, Gene Reynolds, and Larry Gelbart, who wrote most of the first 4 years.
Amazing. And was there just a pilot script at the time? Or
Yeah.
And so you start shooting, and it sounds like you've had 10 seconds with this script that
Yeah.
ended up being a character that you played for such a long time.
Yeah.
Not much rehearsal? Was there
10,
rehearsal?
10 days rehearsal.
Okay.
But even after 10 days, I was standing waiting for the first shot to begin, which was just me leaving the tin building on the compound and walking across the compound, a silent shot. And I thought to myself, I don't know who this guy is. I don't see myself as this guy yet. And I hear out in the compound, quiet on the set, and I'm thinking, how am I going to become this guy? I got about 5 seconds. And you hear the clapperboard, and the director calls action. I open the door, walk out, and there's a nurse walking toward me, an extra. And I just reach out and grab her around the waist and pull her to me and give her a hug. And I think, I'm Hawkeye. That wasn't so hard.
Wow.
You got to. What I do is, at a certain point, when my brain is ready, I just leap into it. You know, I can't think my way into it. It's too intellectual. I can't get it from a
Right.
description. And while I'm doing it, I don't like to describe it. People are always asking me to talk about the
Your
character.
process or your,
Yeah.
right.
If I put it into words, then it becomes mechanical. It just becomes those words. A person is more than a paragraph.
So she didn't slap you.
No, she was acting.
She was.
And she figured so was I.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And so you were kind of off, like something happened in that moment where there was a fusion
Yeah.
of Alan and Hawkeye.
Yeah, I find, I don't know about you, but I find if you know sort of intuitively something about the character, no matter how small it is, and you just leap into that and do it, you begin to connect all the other parts of the character to the parts of you that are the same or similar. And I think there's an awful lot of different kinds of people in me.
You know, it's funny. Julianne Moore, the actress, was just sitting in that chair where you are, and she was saying that one of the things that she loves to do, and she said sometimes people acting with her are almost made nervous by it. She will have she'll just be in conversation with you until really the moment before she starts to shoot. And that can be whether she's playing, someone who's suffering from Alzheimer's, whatever the part is, because it helps her feel like herself, as opposed to I'm Julianne Moore and now I'm doing this
Yeah,
character.
that's good.
And
We often did that on MASH.
where you would just be
In
hanging it.
fact, in fact, if you remember when we did Jake's Women, we all sat around before every performance
Yeah.
and laughed.
And had a great time together, like a
That
family.
was partly my doing, because whenever I can, when I'm doing a play, I try to, without making a big deal out of it, I try to see if the actors will sit together and just make fun of each other and laugh, because when you're laughing together, you're very vulnerable and open. But if failing that, just talking, what that does for me, and I think it does it for everybody, is it establishes a connection between you that's genuine, happening right now. It leaves out everything that happened that day, because if you're just even telling a story about what happened that day,
Yeah.
the connection is in the telling and listening. And I do that on stage right until the curtain goes up, a second before the curtain goes up. And on MASH, we often did it not just before the clapper, after the clapper, even before the first line. And it might look undisciplined, but it's really establishing the connection that you feed off of when you're playing the scene. You're still connected, only with the words of the scene.
That's right. That's right. That's great. And I remember when we did that, you definitely started this tradition. We would all hang out in the green room together. And and you were the star and you were there. And I've never had that. I hadn't had that before or since. Everyone else would be sequestered and kind of quarantined in their dressing
There are
rooms.
people who feel they do better if they get alone for
Super
an hour
quiet.
before
Yeah.
the show.
Yeah.
And I can understand there's something you can get in touch with. If I have to give a talk,
Right.
I try to stay by myself for an hour. I don't want to talk to strangers.
I just take a beta blocker. and then I'm fine.
No, I settle down into myself, and I think about the transitions of what I'm going to say, so I don't have to worry about forgetting if I forget where I am, I just take out my cell phone and look at it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other things I really remembered, and I've told this story often. You go through life, and there are lots of people who have made you very aware of what you have meant to them. Not only did you teach me about community and the true nature of an ensemble company, even though we were in a play called Jake's Women and you played Jake. I'm sure on MASH there was a lot of, I think that was meant to be an ensemble show. It was an ensemble show, but you can't demand how an audience reacts, and they fell in love with Hawkeye, whether you wanted them to or not. And there was slightly a shift in terms of how people saw that show, regardless of what the intent was originally in terms of what the company would be. But the thing that I took away, among many things, because you were such a beautiful teacher for me, this was my first show. I was, really young, started as an understudy in that play, which some people don't want to do. I loved it. I loved getting to rehearse.
I was an
loved
understudy
watching.
too.
Never wanted to go on. I used to pay the people I was understudying, please, like whatever. Don't ever miss a show.
But did you have the feeling I had? I understudied an actor called Don Murray when I was 19. And I loved sitting in the audience watching him play my part.
Totally.
It was my part, and I thought, boy, he doesn't get this at all. You know,
Yeah, I
It
mean,
was-
I've done my best to teach Kate Burton what she should be doing, but clearly, I mean, she's got no, theatrical blood, clearly. No, but I feel like I have no problem with taking on blocking that's already been created, taking on even a rhythm to a line, because it's still mine. Like, in some ways, I appreciate it. Someone's giving me the outline for a paint
Yeah.
by number thing. I'm still going to color it in.
Yeah.
There's only Ilana's going to do it. But for my first Broadway show, it was actually a great way to enter.
So when you took over the part,
Yeah.
did you make it more totally yours?
I feel like I took Kate Burton on stage with me to a certain degree at first, in terms of I feel like she was the best tour guide. I feel like I was traveling around this amazing museum with someone, what was it, Ricardo Montalban, the guy who does whatever his name is. I'm saying his name wrong, but the guy who
Ricardo
did.
Montalban
No, not the
does-
guy from Fantasy Island, but the Philip, the guy who does the
Montebello,
Met.
the Montebello, my God.
No, Ricardo Montalban, the Met curator. The plane. This is the plane. This is the Mona Lisa, boss. No, I felt like, you know what? I came on stage and I saw your face. And I think the first thing I had to do was I was doing a crossword puzzle. And I come out and I just say, Jake, what was a 4-letter word for something, was the line. And you know what? I just looked at you and I loved you. And it was just, nothing could be easier, because I was playing a scene with someone that I loved the way Julie would have loved Jake in
Well,
that
that's
play.
very sweet. Thank
But
you.
the thing I wanted to tell you, and this is such a long-winded thing, but I remember
No, keep it up. It's fine.
and then I'll tell you when else
I
you
got
were
plenty of
amazing.
time.
Exactly. You were very famous, and you were the first person I had worked with who was a bona fide celebrity actor. And you often tried to sneak out the back door when you could and not go out the stage door. But on occasion, for whatever reason, you went out the stage door. And I will never forget, as everyone was standing there with their playbills wanting us to sign them, that they would ask for your autograph. And I remember the first time I was standing next to you, I heard you ask this young woman who was asking for your autograph if you could have hers. And she was so thrown by that interaction. She didn't understand what was happening. And she kept saying, no, I'd like your autograph. And you said, I know, and I would like yours.
I have no memory.
You
Are
don't?
you sure it was me?
Wait, are you Alan Arkin?
That's it.
My God, let's start again. Hi, everyone. My guest today is Alan Arkin.
I don't remember ever saying that.
You did. And you explained to her that as much as you appreciated how much she loved what you did, that for you, there was no real distinction between careers and what makes someone special. And
I went into all of that.
it was, the line started, the traffic forming. It was absolutely an astonishing moment for me. And how funny that you don't remember this thing.
I sure don't remember. I do remember one time being in a Chinese restaurant with Gloria Steinem and Marlo Thomas, and somebody
Whatever happened to them?
and somebody came over to the table and said, "Could I have your autographs?" And Marlo, I think Marlo signed, and I said, "I'm sorry, I don't sign autographs. I shake hands." And Gloria said, "After all, why should I sign? You should be signing an autograph for me. I don't sign." And Marlo said, "For God's sake, sign the damn thing and let's eat."
Oh, wow. Do people still, Free to Be You and Me was really the soundtrack to my childhood. Did
A
your
lot of
kids
people,
listen to it?
Yeah, and I think 2 or 3 generations have. And my grandson, one of my grandsons, did a show in school when he was about 7 or 8, based on Free to Be, almost 40 years later.
Yeah. When did you realize that you could use your voice as a person who was on television playing a fictional character
Yeah.
to someone who could use it for the power of attempting to change minds or illuminate things that were important to you? And how did that start for you?
When I was making around the end of the first year of MASH, or the second year, I can't, maybe the end of the first year, somebody called me up and asked if I wanted to help get the Equal Rights Amendment ratified. It had been ratified in one swoop in 1 or 2 years by, I think, almost 35 states, and they needed 3 more, I think, and they never got 3 more. But for 10 years, I campaigned for it. I went around to state legislatures, which was a horrible experience.
I'm sure.
I mean, some of the stories I got from mixing with people who would promise to vote for it, and tell you all the reasons why it was a good idea, and then read from the Bible against it on the floor of their Senate. It was amazing. And the story I'll never forget is this one guy who told a woman who was lobbying for the Equal Rights Amendment. He said, "All right, I'll give you my vote if you come up to my hotel room." And then he described what he wanted.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, and it wasn't even polite terms.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure. I'm sure there are women. When I think about activists and going back as far as the suffragettes, right? I mean, what women have had to go through and put up with, and what's still going on.
Yeah,
So
it still
it's
is.
just
It's
it's
surprising.
just horrific.
I just started a company called the Alda Communication Company. The acronym is ACT.
Uh-huh.
You got to go like that. ACT.
Okay. Oh, I hate that this is audio.
Because I'm now.
I'll use descriptive language in the hashtag ACT. Yes.
Yeah. So our first project is women in business, for women working in corporations and stuff, where surprisingly, after so much of the culture changed in the effort to pass the Equal Rights Amendment, and during that whole wave of feminism, surprisingly, women are still interrupted at the conference table. They're still ignored. They're still having things explained to them as if they're children, passed over for jobs paid less than the person they're training
Right.
is promoted over them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm telling you, you know better than I do. But Deloitte they try to get survey numbers on all these things.
Sure.
And they came up with the conclusion, what I think is interesting, because it's the conclusion we came up with when we were doing focus groups and working out the program, that women are treated so badly they lose confidence. And then that works against them in addition to what to the disadvantaged position they're put in.
Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes absolute sense.
So we what we do is, this might interest you. We start, as we do when we teach scientists and doctors to communicate better. We start with improvisation, not comedy improvisation, but Viola Spolin's work. Did you ever do that?
Yes. Yes, I did with Paul Sills and
Yeah,
that whole.
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That was part of my theater training. All
Yeah,
those games.
That's
which
the
are,
only training I ever had, and I think I do recommend theater training for actors, but it shouldn't exclude improvisation, serious improvisation, because it helps you do what we were talking about before. It helps you relate. That's why we teach it to scientists and doctors, and now people in corporations, because relating is everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can't communicate with somebody unless you read their face and know what they're thinking and feeling while you're talking to them, because if they're not getting it, it doesn't matter what you say to them.
Right. Right.
And it also changes the way you communicate with them. If you're observing them, you're taking them in, you open up and they open up. and there's something happening between you that wasn't happening when it was just an exchange of words.
You know, it's so funny. The word mindfulness has become a very popular
Yeah,
word now in
yeah.
our current community, and I feel like when I read about you or think about you, that you have been living or working toward mindfulness.
Well, sometimes deliberately. I mean, I started to figure that out in one of the books I wrote,
Yeah,
that was a good idea.
yeah,
It was a good way to notice the life you were living. What's the point of living it if you don't notice it? And what's the point of talking to somebody if you don't notice them? And the amazing thing is that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about this, and
and talking.
yeah, and right, I do a lot of that. But I've also been reading a lot of research about it, and things change when you let the other person be there for you, let the other person in. I don't think you're really listening unless you're willing to be changed by the other person. It's what we go through on the stage.
Right.
If you come in to a scene determined to do the scene the way you figured out how you're going to do it, regardless of what I do, it's not going to be a very good scene. And the same goes on my end. If, however you come in, that's what I'm working with. And I got to see it and hear it and let myself respond to it without thinking, just openly respond. That's an improvisational moment. That
Right.
makes the acting experience creative and not just interpretive.
Well, what do I remember reading that when you were doing MASH, sort of at the height of that show's success and your success, the kind of bagfuls of fan mail and letters started coming in,
Yeah.
and people still wrote letters back then. And on occasion, you would get letters from people. It's the idea of playing something and people believing that you have certain powers because you
Yeah.
are believing it.
Yeah.
And that people would write you not just fan letters or letters telling you about all sorts of things in their life, but people who were worried about taking their own lives were
Yeah, that
writing to
scared me
you.
when I started getting notes like
Of
that.
course.
I at at first I thought I got to wait. I can't answer this right away. I have to think of a good answer. And then I realized that sometimes a couple of weeks had gone by and the person might have killed themselves by
Right,
now. So
right.
that wasn't going to work.
Not the best response.
No, no. And then I didn't want to dash off an answer that was not well thought out. So I made a form letter that sounded very personal, but that included a suicide hotline in their neighborhood. And it was ironic. I thought that here I am sending form letters to people who are thinking of killing themselves, but I made it as personal as I could.
Right.
So, but the objective was to get it out as fast as possible and try to be helpful to them with, mainly with a word of encouragement, but mainly the hotline number.
But the idea that you have been really well known for really a very large percentage of your life.
Yeah.
You talked about and sort of what people endow you with when you reach that position of being in their homes daily in their living room on a television set to the point where they feel like they know you.
Yeah.
You described that you would fly back and forth a lot in order to kind of have your family life and your work life continue simultaneously. How did you handle all that time apart from your kids? And what was that like for you? And did you feel like you could do it and be in both places at once?
You don't know what would happen if you didn't do it.
Yeah.
So we all made the best of it. But it was only about 4 months out of the year because during the spring and the summer we would be together.
So you were shooting, right? So they could be with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I would, for 4 months each year until they were in college, I'd be gone usually Monday through Friday. But one week I went home 3 times in a week because anytime I had 2 days off, I went home. I didn't make a big deal out of it, but I didn't want to miss any of their childhood if I could, if I could be there.
Right. So you worked it out to
Yeah.
the best that you
Yeah.
could.
Yeah.
And did any of your kids go on to become involved in the arts or actors? Did they have the bug?
Two wanted to act, and one decided that she didn't enjoy it even when she got work.
Okay.
And the other one switched over to writing and directing and has made documentaries.
Well, you
Very good
switched
ones.
over to writing and directing during MASH. You became a really prolific writer of episodes, and you directed them. Was that the first time that you wrote?
No, I have been trying. I wanted to write before I wanted to be an actor. When I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a writer.
Oh.
And I would make little movies, so I was directing home movies when I was 10 and 11 and 12. But I directed a play in summer stock, but I didn't do much directing before MASH. But it was really a thrilling experience the first time I directed a MASH episode.
Was the cast like, were they excited and responsive? Did they play tricks on you? Was that a pranky kind of set?
Yes, it was. There were a lot of pranks. During an operating scene, everyone was in danger of having medical instruments clipped to your surgical gown while you were acting. You'd turn around to be 2 pounds of surgery on your back. And what was I telling you?
Well, we were talking about how much you love to write, and then so you directed the first time you directed MASH.
The first time I directed an episode of MASH, it involved a picnic scene with 80 people on camera, and I think I had 4 or 5 cameras shooting at once, so it was a real big production. And I had to get the last shot as people were being pulled into a mud pit on a tug of war. And it was I had to get that shot.
Right.
And the sun was setting behind a mountain. They got pulled in and they pulled themselves out during the shot and walked away just as the sun went behind the mountain.
So there was magic.
Yeah, and it was an automatic fade out.
By God.
Yeah.
Compliments of God.
Yeah.
I feel like you've always been someone who says yes and then figures out how to do it.
That's like improvisation. I think when you improvise enough, you get a certain amount of confidence and you think, if I have the basic amount to accomplish this, it doesn't have to be perfect. And lately I've been telling people I work with, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be great.
Yeah.
And then some of them say, could you explain that? And I say, no, I can't explain that.
That sounds really easy.
Yeah. It's kind of Zen-like.
Yeah. Well, I can't not talk about Horace and Pete because
I love that.
I thought it was one, I came to it late. I watched it after it had already finished and just binge watched it all at once. It wasn't on my radar for some reason. And then it was I lost a couple of days of my life. My children didn't eat, but you know what? They're young and scrappy and it created independence for them. I thought that everything, my husband played Edie Falco's husband on Nurse Jackie for many, many years.
I didn't realize that.
And so I know Edie, and I had worked with you, and it was really a case of watching people whose work I thought I knew unfold in such brilliant new ways. And I just thought that was brilliant casting. That's one of the most painful shows I've ever seen.
Isn't it amazing?
It's
funny, but it's truly tragic.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it deals
he's
with...
a wonderful writer.
Yeah. And
we're talking about Louis C.K.
We are talking about Louis C.K., and it's really... listeners, you can watch it on YouTube or the Louis C.K. channel.
It's on Hulu,
and
too.
Hulu, yes.
Yeah.
But it's brutal and funny, and in some ways it reminded me of a little bit of All in the Family. Like there's ways in which certain characters harken back to this very pure writing, and it was so simple and complicated at the same time. But this was a character I've never seen you play on film before.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, you are still having so much fun.
I know.
Right? Like to reinvent yourself at this point in your career.
And that was the same thing as Hawkeye,
You didn't know what was going to happen.
No, Louis said, so you'd like to play? I saw the script. I said, I'd like to play this. And he said, you don't seem like the guy.
Yeah.
I said, well, man, I don't know, but I can do it. He said, well, if you think you can do it, okay, great. And it was a question of jumping into it and not imposing an idea on it, not saying this is a certain kind of guy.
Right.
I found him and me. I mean, I am him. Some parts of me are him. And he is. He's one of the world's worst people.
Sure.
Somebody on Twitter described him very well and said he was, no, I can't remember what she said. It was like
I think I know. I think it had to do with
vulnerable,
yes,
heartbreakingly
yes,
vulnerable.
and what an amazing way to look at that character.
Yeah.
That behavior could only come out of someone
It's
who's suffered.
suffering, yeah.
Yeah.
And rough on everybody else. But you see the suffering, and you see the suffering not because I'm so great, but you see the suffering because it's in the writing.
Well, look, it always starts with great writing,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're only as good as the writing, or you can. I mean, in this case, I felt like it was really one of those very special, magical moments where part and person kind of fused together in this kind of amazing way. You were, well, it looked to me that you were having a great time. And I thought, wow, like to still get excited and want to challenge yourself. I mean, tell me now, what are you passionate about right now? What is exciting to you right now in your life?
I love acting and I love writing. I really do enjoy the experience. It's an ecstasy about acting that I really love. But since I did Horace and Pete, I haven't seen anything that makes me want to do it because that was such a rich experience.
Yeah.
I don't want to just get up and act just for
Right.
I don't have to, thank God. But what I'm really passionate about is communication now.